I think the key takeaway is that the budget and the Office for Budget Responsibility (OBR) report that came along with it demonstrates that we've got some real problems as a country. I'm afraid we're not unique in that, but the way that household disposable income over the next couple of years is going to fall is unprecedented since we've had records. And it's going to be a very, very tough time. The public finances have obviously taken a very significant hit, combination of a slowdown in growth and higher interest rates, which means that the government's debt interest bill has gone up a lot, means that we're in much more difficult circumstances. I suppose what I would say in terms of the response is that the government is at least being sensible and serious in terms of addressing it. These are not problems that can be ignored. You do have to put the public finances on a sustainable footing. They've taken some important steps to get us in that direction. I think there are still challenges ahead. It's still quite a sort of loose fiscal policy that the government is taking, and some of those spending cuts may be hard to deliver. So I'm not sure that this is the end of the tax increases, I'm afraid. But we are in pretty serious times, and the government at least is measuring up with a serious response. It's going to be pretty grim for very many households. I mean, this is taking us back to the living standards of 2013. So that is a decade's worth of progress wiped out. And for many people, the next few years are going to be a real struggle. I think, in terms of tone, one thing I do have to say, I thought Jeremy Hunt made this point very well. Within that, we do have to make sure that we protect the most vulnerable, and that is the approach the government is taking. It's perhaps a different approach to the one that the previous government was taking back in September. Yeah, this has real world consequences. I think it's only fair to say that not all of this is the fault of the government. The Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the consequent implications on energy prices, the consequences of COVID, and some of the more recent supply chain difficulties that have flowed from that. All of that was going to make this a difficult set of circumstances. But we've not necessarily made everything as easy for ourselves as we could do. Well, I think both arguments have quite a lot of weight to them. So, if you were looking at this in purely economic terms, you can make the argument that look, the economy is struggling over the next couple of years. We're in a recession. Growth is going to be at best sluggish, even in a year's time. In those circumstances, you wouldn't necessarily be putting up taxes, ideally. So I think it is perfectly legitimate to take the view that you do most of your fiscal tightening in a couple of years' time, when the ABR is predicting that economic growth is likely to be quite strong. In fact, having said that, there is also a political reason, as you say. Does this raise difficult questions for the opposition? Yeah, yes, it does. It also means that the government is not inflicting pain in the second half of a parliament, with a general election imminent. And one potential risk is that the markets look at this and go, you know what, you're not really that serious about doing this, and we needed a bit more of a down payment. But the markets seem to be reasonably relaxed at the moment. The pound is relatively strong compared to where it's been in recent weeks. So maybe they've judged that correctly, that they've got away with that. But yes, I think there are both economic and political motivations. But it's not unreasonable, I think, for the government to say, most of the pain is to come. Where I am a bit skeptical is that they really will be able to keep spending to the levels that they have in mind after 2025. And I think they're going to have to return to that. And they're either hoping that economic growth is going to outperform the ABR projections, or alternatively, taxes will have to go up after the next general election. And I think there's a fair chance of whoever wins the next general election will see taxes go up again after 2024. The challenge for Labour, or at least the thing that Labour should avoid doing, is falling into the trap of not appearing to be serious about the public finances and not recognising that steps need to be taken. And I think, to be fair to Rachel Reeves, she's pretty keen to avoid that trap herself. I think she can see the difficulty that Labour does still need to establish itself as being a party that can be trusted with the economy. And it's not quite as easy for them as it was when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were running the show, because they were clearly the more responsible of the two. In the end, I think Labour will have to put up taxes for the reasons that I said. The difficulty, I think, for Labour is, at the moment, they're sort of feeling fairly comfortable, is that they can point to some taxes that they would do that the Conservatives wouldn't. So until yesterday, they were saying, well, we'd raise much more on a windfall tax. Well, I think that fox has been shot. So the government is collecting a lot on a windfall tax. Labour are still talking about raising more money from the very wealthiest. They're talking about non-doms. They're talking about carried interest for private equity managers and so on. Let's put it this way: I think it's not always terribly credible to argue the case that you can raise vast sums of money from very small numbers of people without there being a significant behavioral impact that means that you don't raise the revenue that you hope you're going to raise. And I think there's still a risk for Labour that they, these are policies which are popular, I'm sure, but it sort of slightly gives the impression of wishful thinking and being a bit naive. But the difficulty here is that if you want to raise large amounts of revenue, you need a broad-based increase in taxes. That's a tax which lots of people will pay, and that can be really unpopular. But how Labour sort of both manages to convey credibility without saying something that's going to be unpopular is still quite testing. I think it's been quite striking how there's been a shift in the public mood, and to some extent the media mood as well. So I've just done an interview with Sky, and I got asked about Brexit, and I think there is a shift. There is a increased recognition that Brexit is doing economic damage. This is no longer masked by COVID, and there's an increased focus on economic growth and how do we get the economy going again. And clearly, the damage done to Brexit, the OBR believes it's ultimately going to lower our GDP by 4%. That really is pretty significant. And addressing that is something that, if we're really serious about growth, something we should do. I noticed that Jeremy Hunt this morning talked about trying to remove trade barriers with the EU. And that's one of the more encouraging things we've heard from government ministers for a long time. But there is this great nervousness coming from both the main parties. They both come to the view that the swing voters at the next general election are by and large people who voted Leave in 2016 and voted Conservative for the first time in 2019 because Boris Johnson promised to get Brexit done. And those are the key voters. But if you look at what is happening the country as a whole, you're right to highlight some of the polling, not just the polling of do you think the country made the right decision back in 2016, which could be motivated by a whole range of things, including generally how is the country going at the moment. But I was very struck that an opinion poll from YouGov ask the question: do you think we should stay out of the EU, or do you think we should rejoin? And 54% said we should rejoin. Given that there isn't a political party, a major political party, that is advocating that course of action, there are very few politicians who are advocating that course of action. In truth, I'm not sure that the EU would want us to rejoin just at the moment. In any event, but it is quite striking. So I think the issue of Brexit is going to become perhaps even more significant over the next 2 years, whilst living standards are falling, particularly as the UK looks as if it's going to be an outlier over the next 2 years compared to the economies of the European Union. It will look pretty clearly, I'm afraid, that we are falling behind. And up until now, that hasn't really been the case. It's been much more complicated because of COVID. But I think in the course of 2023 and 2024, it will look as if the UK is falling behind the EU. And that's bound to play into public opinion. I'm not considering a return at the moment. To some extent, life has moved on. But obviously, I remain very much engaged in the political debate. I'm fortunate enough to have a platform or two in which I can get my views across. And I continue to believe in the politics of the liberal internationalist centre right. I don't think those views are sort of fully represented anywhere in particular. Although I have much more sympathy for the government of Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt than I did perhaps for its predecessors. But no imminent plans to return. But who knows?